In the vastness of the galaxy, war had become a constant. The alien empire ruled over countless star systems with an unyielding grip, and their queen, Lorana, was a powerful and feared leader. Her empire, filled with technologically advanced species, was a force to be reckoned with. Yet despite her power, there was always unrest beneath the surface, hidden in the shadows of palace walls and military commands. Humanity had once been seen as a weak species, just another small planet in the corner of the galaxy, but times had changed. The humans had fought their way through the ranks of the stars, gaining respect for their resourcefulness, bravery, and unyielding will. They had made a peace treaty with the alien empire years ago, and as part of the agreement, a human guard was assigned to protect the queen. Though the queen's alien guards were more numerous and far stronger, there was one human among them who had earned her trust, Corvin Durand. Corvin had once been a soldier in the human military, serving in some of the most dangerous missions in history. He had fought on distant planets, battled hostile alien forces, and survived countless battles. He was tough, cunning, and always ready to act. Yet it was his instincts that set him apart from the others. Corvin had an uncanny ability to sense danger before it arrived, a skill that had saved his life and the lives of others countless times. It was why he had been chosen to serve as a personal guard to Queen Lorana. For weeks, Corvin had watched the queen from the shadows, always keeping a safe distance but close enough to protect her. He knew her well, or at least he thought he did. Queen Lorana was a master tactician, a cold and calculating ruler who had risen to power by eliminating her enemies with ruthless efficiency. Her intelligence was unmatched, and her beauty was a weapon as sharp as any blade. Despite her imposing presence, there were moments when Corvin could see a different side of her, a vulnerability that few others had ever witnessed. Today, however, there was something different in the air. Corvin could feel it. The usual hum of the palace's energy systems was slightly off. The chatter of the palace servants was quieter than usual, and there was an undercurrent of tension that he couldn't shake. Something was wrong. And it wasn't just the weather or the strange sounds echoing through the palace corridors. It was the whispers. Corvin had heard rumors in the last few days, hushed conversations from the palace staff, the military commanders, and even the queen's personal advisors. It was clear that not everyone in the empire was loyal to the queen. There were factions within her own ranks, powerful men and women who saw her as a threat or as a means to further their own ambitions. For the first time in her reign, Queen Lorana's position was vulnerable. There were traitors among her closest allies, and they were preparing to strike. Corvin had no proof, only a feeling, but his instincts were never wrong. The palace, with its tall, sleek walls of alien metal and shimmering glass, felt suffocating to him as he moved through the halls. The faint sound of his boots echoed in the vast, empty spaces. The palace was nearly silent, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. Corvin quickened his pace. His orders had been clear: keep the queen safe at all costs, but this was different. This wasn't just about guarding her from physical threats. This was about something deeper, something more sinister. As he rounded a corner, Corvin spotted two of the queen's elite guards. They were posted at the entrance to her private chambers, standing at attention with their usual stoic expressions. The guards were impressive, each one taller and stronger than any human could ever be. Their alien physiology made them nearly invincible in combat, but they lacked the sharp instincts that Corvin had. They were trained to fight, but not to sense danger before it arrived. Corvin nodded to them as he approached. They didn't react as expected. He knew them both by name, though he had never had much to say to them. They were warriors, bred for battle and focused only on their duty. But Corvin wasn't like them. He didn't just follow orders, he observed. And right now, he was observing something he didn't like. He stood outside the door to the queen's chambers, taking a moment to listen. The usual sounds of quiet conversation and the faint hum of machinery were absent. Instead, there was only an eerie stillness. His hand hovered over the control panel, and for a moment he considered whether he should enter without permission. But he knew that wasn't the way. Corvin was a man of rules, even if those rules sometimes got in the way. He pressed the button, and the door slid open silently. Inside, the queen stood by the large, curved window of her chamber, staring out into the dark expanse of space. The stars glittered like tiny diamonds scattered across the black velvet of the sky. Her silhouette was striking, the perfect blend of elegance and strength. She was the picture of control, her sharp features softened by the dim, ambient lighting that filled the room. Corvin stepped inside, his eyes never leaving her. She had a presence that demanded attention, even without saying a word. But today she seemed different. Her back was stiff, her eyes focused but distant, as if she were lost in thought, lost in the weight of her responsibilities. "Your Majesty," Corvin said, his voice calm but firm, "I need to speak with you." The queen didn't turn around at first. She remained at the window, her hands clasped behind her back. "What is it, Corvin?" Her voice was cold, but it always had been. "I trust you know the rules." "You've already seen me. Leave me to my thoughts." But Corvin could tell she was distracted, her mind far away from the conversation. He stepped closer, his voice dropping lower. "Your Majesty, I've been hearing rumors. I'm afraid there may be a plot against your life." She finally turned, her piercing eyes meeting his. Her expression was unreadable, as always, but for the briefest moment, Corvin saw something flicker there, something like surprise, but it was gone almost immediately. "A plot," the queen repeated. "By who?" Corvin hesitated. He wasn't sure how much to reveal, how much to trust. But the truth was there was no time for doubt. He needed her to understand the gravity of the situation. "There are factions within your own council, Your Majesty. High-ranking officials who think you've outlived your usefulness. They're plotting to remove you." The queen's gaze never wavered, but Corvin saw the slightest shift in her posture, a sign that his words had reached her. For a moment, she said nothing. Instead, she crossed the room slowly and stood in front of him, her eyes scanning his face for any sign of hesitation or doubt. "You are sure of this?" she asked softly. Corvin nodded. "I can feel it. There's a growing tension in the air. It's not just the rumors, it's the way the people around you are acting. Your closest allies are not as loyal as they seem." The queen studied him for a long moment, and Corvin felt the weight of her gaze on him. She was a woman who had seen countless betrayals, who had fought for power her entire life. Trust was a rare thing for her, and yet there was something about Corvin, something about the way he spoke, the certainty in his voice, that made her pause. She exhaled slowly, her voice calm but firm. "What do you propose we do about it?" Corvin stepped closer, the tension in the room palpable. "We need to leave the palace immediately, Your Majesty. I can get you to safety before the plot unfolds." For the first time since Corvin had entered the room, the queen's expression softened, though only slightly. She looked out the window once again, her mind clearly racing as she considered her options. But she knew, deep down, that Corvin was right. Her life was in danger. "Very well," she said, turning back to him. "Lead the way, Corvin, but if this is a trap, you will be the first to face my wrath." Corvin didn't flinch. "Understood, Your Majesty." And with that, the two of them moved into the unknown, where the fate of the galaxy and of the Queen would soon be decided. Queen Lorana's heart raced as she followed Corvin down the winding corridors of her palace. The dim, cold metal walls of the ancient palace, which had once been a symbol of her unshakable power, now felt like a labyrinth, dangerous and unfamiliar. For the first time, she questioned the security of her fortress, the very place she had ruled from for so long. The rumors Corvin had whispered to her echoed in her mind, loud and threatening, a plot against her life. Though she had ruled with strength and cunning, even Queen Lorana wasn't immune to the power struggles that plagued her court. But Corvin, his words, his confidence, had sparked something in her. He had served her for years as a low-ranking human guard, a role she had once dismissed as nothing more than a formality. But in that brief moment of conversation, she saw something in him. Trust. His warning felt real, and for the first time in her reign, she wondered if she had overlooked something. Something dangerous. The pace of their footsteps quickened as they neared an emergency escape route, hidden passages known only to the highest members of the court. A trusted group of guards had once maintained these routes, ensuring the queen could flee at a moment's notice. But those guards were now long gone, replaced by soldiers with unknown loyalties. The corridor they walked down felt eerily quiet, the soft hum of machinery the only sound breaking the silence. They had crossed paths with no one, and Corvin's instincts told him that was not a good sign. They reached a heavy, reinforced door at the far end of the corridor, one that led to a series of hidden passageways beneath the palace. It was the quickest way out, and with the palace on alert, it was their best option. Corvin looked at the door for a moment before he moved forward to open it. But as his hand touched the cool, metallic surface, a sound came from the distance. A muffled shout, followed by the unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps. Troops. They were closing in. Move quickly, Corvin whispered, his voice calm but urgent. The Queen didn't argue. She had always been sharp, quick to act when needed. She had survived this long by trusting her instincts, and now she could feel the pressure in the air. They weren't safe, not yet. Corvin pushed open the door, the heavy mechanism groaning in protest, and stepped into the darkness beyond. The Queen followed closely, the weight of her royal garments muffling her footsteps. She had always been graceful, but now there was no time for elegance. They were in a race against time, and every second counted. The hidden passages were narrow and lined with thick cables that buzzed faintly with power. The walls were cold to the touch, the air stale. For all its isolation, it was the safest place in the palace at that moment. "Which way?" the Queen asked, her voice steady, though Corvin could see the unease in her eyes. "Straight ahead," Corvin replied, pointing to the far end of the narrow passage. "It'll lead us to an escape pod hidden near the hangar." The Queen didn't question him. She trusted him more than she had trusted anyone in years. They moved quickly, their footsteps echoing in the empty corridor, the silence surrounding them thick with the tension of the unknown. Minutes later, they reached a thick door at the end of the passage. It was heavily secured, with a high-tech locking mechanism that Corvin could disable easily. He went to work quickly, pulling out a small tool from his utility belt. "Do you think they've already made it this far?" the Queen asked, her voice low. "I don't know," Corvin replied. "But if they haven't, they will soon." Just as Corvin completed the process of unlocking the door, the faint hum of palace alarms began to blare in the distance. The sound cut through the stillness like a knife. It was happening. Before the Queen could react, the door slid open with a soft hiss. On the other side, a small, hidden hangar space awaited. It was stark and cold, illuminated by harsh, artificial lighting. Several escape pods were docked, and there was a faint whiff of fuel in the air. "Get inside," Corvin urged, his voice urgent. The Queen didn't hesitate. She entered the pod, moving quickly, but her mind was racing. Who had betrayed her? She had never thought that her own council, the very people she had trusted with her empire, would turn on her. The thought gnawed at her insides. She had been a ruler for so long, and now everything felt like it was slipping through her fingers. Corvin followed her inside and sealed the pod doors behind him. As he sat down at the controls, he activated the ship systems, and the pod slowly came to life. The hum of the engines was a stark contrast to the silence they had just left behind in the palace. "We'll make it," Corvin said, his voice steady. He believed it, but even he knew that things were only just beginning. There was no way to know if the palace was completely secure, if they could outrun the conspiracy that was growing around them. But they had no choice. They had to try. Corvin brought the pod into the air, the hangar doors opening before them. For a moment, they were surrounded by nothing but the black emptiness of space. The vastness of the galaxy stretched out before them, but that only reminded them of how small they were in comparison. They were alone in this fight now. There was no going back. As the pod accelerated, Queen Lorana sat back in her seat, watching the palace grow smaller in the distance. The space station that had once been her home, her power, was now just a dot in the cold, dark expanse. She could feel the weight of her failure pressing down on her. She had underestimated the dangers lurking beneath the surface. She had trusted the wrong people, and now everything was falling apart. But as she looked over at Corvin, sitting beside her at the controls, she realized that her life wasn't over. Not yet. If there was one thing she knew for sure, it was that Corvin would never let her down. He had warned her. He had saved her life. And now, as they hurtled through the stars, she had no choice but to trust him completely. "Corvin," the Queen said, her voice quieter now. "Who do you think is behind this?" Corvin's gaze was fixed on the controls, but his jaw tightened. He had his suspicions, but there was no use in sharing them yet. There were bigger battles ahead. He needed to focus. "I don't know yet," Corvin said, his voice low, "but we'll find out together." The pod continued its flight, the lights of distant stars flickering in the void. The journey ahead was uncertain, but Corvin was determined. He had sworn an oath to protect the Queen, and he would not break that oath, not while there was still breath in his body. As they approached a safe haven in the distant reaches of the galaxy, Queen Lorana looked out the small viewport. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. They were not alone, not anymore. And for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to believe that there was hope. Hope that the galaxy could be saved. Hope that humanity could play a part in it. The silence inside the escape pod was heavy. Queen Lorana sat rigidly in her seat, staring out into the vast emptiness of space, her mind spinning with thoughts she could hardly grasp. Her empire, once an unstoppable force, was crumbling. Her very life had nearly been taken by those she had trusted the most. But Corvin had warned her. He had saved her life. The pod hummed steadily as they flew farther away from the palace, the last place she had truly felt safe. Lorana had been prepared for many things in her life: betrayal, war, and conquest. But the treachery within her own council had shaken her to her core. The people who had sworn allegiance to her, who had shared in her victories and her losses, had turned against her. And now they were out there, still scheming. Corvin glanced over at the Queen as he piloted the escape pod. He could feel the tension in the air between them. She was thinking, processing everything that had happened in such a short span of time. He knew her well enough to see that she was struggling to come to terms with her betrayal. But there was no time for that now. They were alive, and that was the only thing that mattered. He had to keep her focused. "We'll reach a safe location soon," Corvin said, breaking the silence. His voice was calm, but it carried an edge of urgency. "Once we're there, we can plan our next move." The Queen didn't respond right away. Her eyes were fixed on the stars outside the viewport, her thoughts far away. After a long pause, she finally spoke, her voice quieter than before. "Corvin, I have to know who is behind this, who would do such a thing." Corvin didn't look at her, but he could feel the weight of her question. It was a question he had asked himself countless times. Who could have turned against the Queen? Who had the ambition, the drive to destroy her? "I think I have an idea," Corvin said slowly. "But we need to be careful about what we assume. The traitors may not be who we think they are." Lorana turned to face him, her eyes sharp. "What do you mean?" Corvin took a deep breath before speaking. "It's not just your council, your majesty. The traitors we've seen so far, those who tried to assassinate you, they may have been working for someone else. A rival faction, someone from outside the Empire, someone who sees you as a threat." Lorana's brows furrowed. "A rival faction, but who could possibly be that bold?" Corvin paused before replying. "There are rumors of a rebellion, of factions within the galaxy's outer reaches. Groups that have been building strength in the shadows. They've been waiting for a chance to strike at the heart of the Empire. And your reign, was their biggest obstacle." The Queen's mind raced as she absorbed this new information. She had always been aware of the smaller factions, the rebels and pirates who lived on the fringes of the galaxy, but she had never believed they posed a real threat to her rule. She had been wrong. "And you think one of these factions is behind the plot?" she asked, her voice colder than before. "I do," Corvin said, his tone serious. "They've been patient, waiting for the right moment to strike. And when you rose to power, when you proved yourself to be an even stronger ruler than your father, they saw an opportunity to destroy everything you've built." Lorana's gaze hardened. "Then we will find them, and we will destroy them." Corvin didn't respond immediately, his focus still on the pod's controls. He knew the Queen's resolve. Once she made up her mind, nothing could stop her. But he also knew that they were still in a precarious position. If this rebellion was as widespread as he feared, they would need more than just strength and determination to defeat it. They would need allies. As if on cue, a warning light flashed on the control panel. Corvin's eyes shot to the display. The signal was weak, but it was unmistakable. Someone was tracking them. "We've been followed," Corvin said, his voice low but urgent. Lorana's eyes narrowed. "How many?" Corvin's hands flew over the controls as he scanned the pod's sensors. "One ship closing in fast." "It's not one of ours." Lorana stood from her seat, her posture stiff. "Are we in danger?" Corvin's mind raced as he calculated their chances. The escape pod wasn't heavily armed. It was meant for emergency evacuations, not combat. But he wasn't about to let anyone take them back to the hands of the traitors. "We're not defenseless," he said quickly, "but we'll have to outmaneuver them." He pushed the controls forward, the pod jolting as it sped up. Outside, the blackness of space stretched endlessly, but there was no time to marvel at the vastness. Corvin focused entirely on evading the ship behind them. The other ship was fast, much faster than Corvin had anticipated. It was closing the gap too quickly, its engines roaring as it gained on them. The pod swerved sharply, sending Lorana stumbling against the side. She steadied herself with a sharp breath and turned to Corvin, her face grim. "We need to lose them, Corvin," she said, her voice a mix of anger and determination. "If they catch us—" Corvin didn't need her to finish the sentence. He knew exactly what would happen if they were caught. The traitors would not show mercy. They would kill them both, and whatever plans they had for the future would be lost. "I'm doing everything I can," Corvin replied, his voice tight with concentration. The pod rocked violently as Corvin made a sharp turn, narrowly avoiding a burst of laser fire from the pursuing ship. The ship was close now, too close. Corvin could see it in the pod's rearview sensor. It was a sleek black vessel with sharp angles and menacing weaponry. It was a military-class ship built for speed and combat, and it was gaining on them. "Brace yourself," Corvin shouted, slamming the controls to the side. The pod spiraled, diving sharply toward a nearby asteroid field. It was a risky move, but it was their best chance. The smaller, more agile pod would be able to navigate the tight spaces better than the larger, more heavily armed ship. The ship followed them into the asteroid field, its weapons firing wildly as it tried to corner them. But Corvin was in his element now. He knew how to weave through the rocks and debris, his heart pounding as the pod weaved through the obstacles. Each maneuver brought them closer to safety, or closer to disaster. The rocks whizzed past them, barely missing the hull. Lorana was silent, her eyes wide with concentration as she watched the asteroid field unfold before them. She had always been a woman of action, but this was different. The stakes had never been higher. After what felt like an eternity, the pursuing ship broke off, unable to navigate the asteroid field as quickly as the escape pod. Corvin let out a breath he didn't know he had been holding. The immediate danger had passed, but the tension between them hadn't eased. Lorana turned to him, her expression unreadable. That was too close. Corvin wiped his brow with the back of his hand, his muscles still tense from the chase. "It won't be the last time." The Queen nodded, her mind already racing to the next step. The enemy had shown their hand, and now she had no choice but to prepare for the war that was coming. "We need to find allies," she said, her voice cold but filled with purpose. "If this rebellion is as widespread as you say, we can't fight it alone." Corvin's eyes met hers, and he nodded. "I'll do whatever it takes." The pod soared through the cold expanse of space, leaving behind the asteroid field and the danger they had narrowly escaped. But even as the immediate threat vanished, the weight of the situation hung heavily in the air. The Queen sat silent, her sharp eyes fixed on the control panel in front of her. The hum of the engines was the only sound between them. It was a heavy silence, filled with the tension of what had happened and what was yet to come. Corvin kept his focus on the controls, his hands steady as they adjusted the course. He had learned long ago that keeping his mind sharp in moments of danger was the only way to survive. The escape had been close, too close, but now they were free, at least for the moment. His mind, however, was racing. The pursuit had confirmed his worst fear. The conspiracy against Queen Lorana was much larger than he had anticipated. He didn't speak at first, unsure of what to say. He had promised to protect her, and so far he had kept that promise. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that the danger was only growing. The traitors weren't just in the palace. They were out there, hiding in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike again. And the Queen was their target. After a long pause, Lorana finally spoke. Her voice was low, but there was a clear sense of determination in her words. "Where are we going now, Corvin?" she asked, her gaze still on the dark stretch of space outside the viewport. Corvin shifted in his seat, glancing at her briefly before returning his attention to the controls. "We'll be heading to an old safe house I know of," he replied. "It's a remote location far off the beaten path. No one will find us there." Lorana nodded, though her face remained unreadable. She had always been a master of hiding her emotions, a trait that served her well as a ruler. But in this moment, with the weight of the galaxy on her shoulders and the threat of betrayal looming over her, she felt the exhaustion creeping in. She hadn't slept properly in days, and the adrenaline that had kept her sharp was beginning to wear off. As the pod continued its journey, the reality of their situation began to settle in. They were fugitives now, fleeing from a conspiracy that had roots deep within the heart of her empire. The loyalty of her closest allies had been shattered. Her empire was crumbling from within, and the people she had trusted most had betrayed her. Corvin, sensing her growing unease, turned to her, his voice steady. "We'll be safe soon, just hang on." The Queen's eyes met his, and for a brief moment she allowed herself to relax. Corvin had always been there for her. His loyalty, his dedication to her safety had never faltered. And in that moment she realized that without him, she might not have made it this far. The thought of losing him, of losing the one person who had truly stood by her, was something she couldn't bear. They continued on their path, the journey ahead uncertain but necessary. As the hours passed, the stars outside began to blur into a sea of distant lights, the endless void of space stretching out before them. It was hard to keep track of time in the isolation of space, but Corvin kept a careful eye on the navigational system, ensuring they stayed on course. Lorana sat quietly, her thoughts drifting. She was thinking about her empire, the people who had once served her, the ones who had betrayed her. She had spent so many years building her power, gaining the loyalty of millions, and now it seemed like it was all falling apart. The rebellion, the conspiracy, the assassination attempts, it was all too much. She had always been a woman of action, a ruler who led from the front. But now she found herself lost in thought, trying to piece together the puzzle that was unfolding around her. Who could she trust? Who had turned against her and who was still loyal? The answers seemed so distant, so hard to find. As the pod moved deeper into the galaxy, Corvin's voice broke through her thoughts. "We're almost there," he said. "Once we land, we'll take some time to rest and regroup. You'll need it." The Queen didn't reply right away. She was grateful for the space, the quiet, but she knew that rest wouldn't be enough to solve the problems she faced. The rebellion wasn't just a threat to her. It was a threat to everything she had worked for, everything she had fought to protect. They reached the safe house after several hours. The location was a small, unassuming station hidden among a cluster of distant planets. It wasn't much, just a simple base with enough supplies to last for a while. But it was enough to keep them hidden, and for now, that was all they needed. Corvin brought the pod in for a landing, and the ship touched down softly on the rocky surface. The Queen stood, her legs stiff from sitting for so long, and moved toward the hatch. Corvin followed closely behind her, his hand resting on the side of his blaster, always alert. The safe house was dim, its lights flickering as they stepped inside. It wasn't a place of luxury, but it was safe. There were no grand hallways or fine decorations, only the bare essentials. The walls were made of gray metal, the floors dusty from years of disuse. It was the kind of place that wouldn't attract attention, which was exactly why it was perfect. As they entered the main chamber, the Queen's eyes scanned the room. It was small, but it had everything they needed: beds, food, and communications equipment. For the first time in what felt like days, Lorana allowed herself a moment to breathe. She moved to one of the small tables and sat down, her body finally giving in to the exhaustion she had been holding at bay. Corvin set about securing the area, checking the communications equipment to ensure they were safe from any potential eavesdropping. He knew they couldn't stay here forever, but for now, it was enough. The Queen needed rest, and they both needed time to think. Lorana sat at the table, her hands folded in front of her. She didn't speak at first, but Corvin could see the weight of her thoughts. She was thinking about the Empire, about the people she had once trusted, and the future that seemed to be slipping through her fingers. After a while, she looked up at him. "What now, Corvin?" He turned, meeting her gaze. "Now we find out who's behind this. We need to know who's pulling the strings before we make our next move." Lorana nodded. "And how do we do that?" Corvin's face remained calm, but there was a determination in his eyes. "We start by reaching out to those we can trust. There are still loyalists out there, people who haven't fallen to the rebellion. We need to gather information, build alliances, and then we strike back." Lorana's gaze hardened. "We can't let them take everything I've built. They've underestimated me, Corvin. They've underestimated us." Corvin nodded. "I know, Your Majesty, and will make sure they regret it." As the night passed and the quiet of the safe house settled around them, Lorana felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead was uncertain, and the dangers they faced were great. But she wasn't alone. With Corvin at her side, she knew that they still had a chance. The fight for her empire, for her life, was far from over. She looked out the small window of the safe house, her eyes fixed on the distant stars. The galaxy was vast, and its dangers were many. But as long as she had Corvin, she would never give up. There was still a future to fight for, and she would make sure they won.